My name is Natalie. I am 33 years old, and my parents decided their 40th wedding anniversary dinner was the perfect time to publicly discard me. When my father raised his glass in a crowded luxury restaurant to announce an all-expenses-paid family trip to Hawaii, everyone cheered, but when I asked what time our flight departed, he looked me dead in the eyes and said I was not part of the family, and my only job was to stay behind and babysit my sister's kids. My brother-in-law chimed in, flashing a heavy gold watch bought with stolen money, telling me my single and pathetic life was perfect for unpaid childcare. What they did not know was that I had already seen their offshore bank statements. My response to their cruel demand left the entire table paralyzed with fear. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through the pain while secretly plotting the perfect payback against toxic relatives. The crystal chandeliers of the upscale restaurant in Buckhead, Atlanta, cast a warm glow over our private dining room. We were there to celebrate my parents, Richard and Patricia Montgomery, and their 40 years of supposedly perfect marriage. At the head of the long mahogany table sat my father holding court, just like he always did. My mother sat beside him wearing a diamond necklace that caught the light every time she laughed. My younger sister Brittany and her husband Jamal sat across from me. They were the golden couple, always praised, always accommodated, always the absolute center of my parents' universe. I sat quietly at the far end of the table wearing a simple tailored dress, playing my usual role as the quiet background character. When the dessert plates were cleared, my father stood up. He tapped his silver fork against his crystal wine glass. He smoothed the lapels of his custom suit and smiled broadly at the gathered extended family. "Patricia and I have an announcement," he said, his voice booming with practiced authority. "To celebrate 40 years of marriage, and to celebrate the incredible success of Jamal's new tech startup, we are taking the entire family on a 2-week vacation, all expenses paid. We have booked private luxury villas at a 5-star resort in Maui, Hawaii. We leave next Friday." The table erupted in cheers and applause. Brittany clapped her hands together with joy, leaning over to kiss Jamal. My aunts and uncles murmured their excitement, praising my father for his incredible generosity. I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. I pulled out my phone, opening my calendar app to check my schedule. "That sounds absolutely amazing, Dad," I said, my voice carrying over the fading applause. "What time does our flight depart next Friday? I just need to coordinate with my office so I can pack and wrap up a few final audits before we leave." The warm atmosphere in the private dining room evaporated instantly. The smiles on my parents' faces vanished, replaced by a cold, hardened look. My father slowly lowered his wine glass, placing it onto the white tablecloth with a heavy thud. He stared down the length of the table at me, his eyes devoid of any parental affection. The silence stretched out thick and suffocating as the extended family shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "You do not know the flight time," Natalie, my father said, his voice dropping to a harsh, flat tone that echoed off the expensive wood-paneled walls. "Because you are not part of us. You are not coming to Hawaii." I froze, my thumb hovering over my phone screen. "What do you mean I'm not coming?" I asked, confusion battling with the sudden sharp sting of rejection. "You just said the entire family. I meant the family that actually matters," my father replied coldly, not even bothering to lower his voice. "We need to celebrate people who are actually moving forward in life. You can stay behind and take care of all the kids. Someone needs to watch them while the adults enjoy a real vacation." Before I could even process the sheer cruelty of his words, my brother-in-law decided to twist the knife. Jamal leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He smirked at me deliberately, adjusting the heavy, solid gold Rolex on his wrist. "Come on, Nat," Jamal mocked, his deep voice dripping with condescension. "You are 33 years old, completely single, and you have absolutely no life. You have plenty of free time to watch our 3 kids. Brittany and I need a real vacation away from your depressing energy. Just be a good aunt and do your job," Brittany chimed in, tossing her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. "Exactly," she said dismissively. Besides, you would just bring down the mood in Maui anyway. I looked around the table. Not a single aunt or uncle spoke up to defend me. My mother took a delicate sip of champagne, looking bored by my presence. They expected me to shrink down in my chair, apologize for overstepping, and accept my role as the unpaid family servant. But they did not know who they were dealing with anymore. They saw a lonely spinster. They had no idea I was a senior corporate security auditor and had spent the last 48 hours digging through their unsecured digital files. I knew exactly whose stolen money bought Jamal's gold Rolex. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I picked up my water glass, the condensation cool against my fingertips, and took a leisurely sip. I looked directly into Jamal's eyes, then shifted my gaze to my father, and finally to my mother. I let a calm, ice-cold smile spread across my face. "Of course," I said, my voice smooth, betraying zero emotion. "I will happily stay behind today." The morning sun barely crested the horizon. When the aggressive pounding on my apartment door began, I opened the heavy wooden door to find my mother standing in the hallway. Patricia wore a pristine outfit and a scowl that deepened when she saw my bathrobe. Without a word of greeting, she threw her heavy brass keyring at my chest. I caught it purely on reflex, the jagged metal biting into my palm. "You need to head over to our estate right now," she demanded, pushing past me to inspect my modest living room. Richard just bought a top-of-the-line smart home security system and complicated wireless routers. "We need them installed and fully operational before our flight to Honolulu." I stared at the keys in my hand. "You drove here at 7 in the morning to demand I install your cameras," I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. She sighed, rolling her eyes. "Do not make this a bigger deal than it is, Natalie. You are going to be babysitting your sister's children all week in your tiny apartment. We need to be able to monitor the perimeter of our property from the beach in Maui, and we want to check in on you. You sit at a desk staring at screens for that boring little computer job of yours. You should know how to plug in a few cameras." I gripped the cold metal keys tightly. My mother spoke about my career with disdain. To her and my father, any job that did not involve real estate, high finance, or flashy titles was a failure. They thought I was some tech support drone, fixing printer jams for minimum wage. What Patricia did not know was that I was a highly paid senior cybersecurity auditor. I worked for a premier global intelligence firm. My job was hunting down corporate financial fraud, penetrating encrypted networks, and finding the digital footprints of corrupt executives. Corporations paid my firm massive retainers specifically for my expertise. I could dismantle a highly secure network in minutes. Setting up consumer-grade security cameras was insulting, but I just smiled, giving absolutely nothing away. "I will get it done, Mom," I said. "Good," she snapped, turning sharply on her heel. "Do not mess this up. Jamal and Brittany are stressed about leaving their kids with you, so the least you can do is make sure your father and I have peace of mind." She walked out, leaving the scent of expensive perfume lingering in the stale hallway air. An hour later, I pulled my sedan through the massive wrought iron gates of the Montgomery estate. The sprawling brick mansion sat on 3 acres of perfectly manicured landscaping, a monument to my parents' obsession with wealth and status. I parked near the 4-car garage and let myself in through the side entrance. The house was dead quiet. I walked into my father's lavish home office, dropping my bag onto his massive oak desk. The boxes of security cameras and router equipment were stacked haphazardly in the corner. I unboxed the equipment methodically, my mind shifting into its analytical state. I connected the new high-speed router and bypassed their basic factory settings. I established a secure administration protocol and began linking the exterior cameras one by one. As I worked, I thought about Jamal's mocking laughter from the night before. I thought about my father telling me I was not part of the family. They wanted me to be the obedient servant, tending to their lives while they drank champagne on a tropical island. They wanted to monitor me. I decided it was time I monitored them, to properly configure the network monitoring tools I needed, to access the main desktop computer. my father used for all his personal and business affairs. I powered up the sleek machine. He had not bothered to set up a strong password. It was just his birth year and his company name. A rookie mistake that made my professional skin crawl. I navigated through his system settings, routing the camera feeds to the cloud storage account they had purchased. I was about to log out when my trained eye caught something out of place. My father was a man who loved organized digital folders labeled by property addresses and tax years. But buried deep within a subfolder, disguised as archived landscaping invoices, was a single zip file with a random alphanumeric name. A normal person would have scrolled right past it, assuming it was a system file. But I was an auditor. I recognized a hastily hidden directory when I saw one. It was poorly secured, protected only by a basic encryption protocol that took me 45 seconds to bypass. I clicked the folder open. My heart began to pound against my ribs as rows of digital files flooded the computer monitor. This was not a collection of old landscaping bills. These were highly detailed financial records, offshore bank routing numbers, and scanned copies of personal identification documents. I leaned closer to the bright screen, my eyes scanning the first document I opened. It was a wire transfer confirmation from an account disconnected from my father's standard real estate holdings. The recipient was a holding company I did not recognize, but the sender information made my breath catch. Every single one told a story of hidden wealth, deliberate deception, and massive sums of money being moved quietly. My hands hovered over the keyboard as my professional instincts took over. I was no longer the obedient daughter fulfilling an insulting errand. I was an auditor, staring at a crime scene. The sheer volume of hidden data was staggering, and the deeper I dug, the darker the secrets became. I opened a final subfolder, clicking on a high scan of a legal document. I stared at the signature at the bottom, feeling the air vanish from the room. This was the end for them all. I sat frozen in my father's heavy leather chair as the reality of the hidden files washed over me. The initial shock quickly morphed into a hyper-focused state of mind. I was no longer a daughter standing in her childhood home. I was a senior corporate security auditor staring at a massive financial anomaly. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I executed a deep dive into the local network to ensure my connection was completely untraceable. I isolated his machine from the main gateway and mirrored the hidden directory to a secure encrypted drive I always carried in my bag. I needed to see exactly what kind of lifestyle my parents were hiding. I opened the first subfolder labeled with the current year. Inside, I found a meticulously organized collection of digital receipts for the upcoming Hawaii trip. The sheer scale of their spending was breathtaking. I clicked open the flight confirmations. My parents, Brittany and Jamal, were not flying commercial economy. They had booked 4 international first-class suites. The flight alone cost $24,000. I moved to the accommodation receipts. They had not just reserved a nice hotel. They had rented a private cliffside luxury villa in Maui for 2 entire weeks. The invoice detailed personal chef services, daily housekeeping, and unrestricted spa access. The total for the villa was $42,000. I kept digging. I found a signed contract for a private yacht rental, complete with a catered champagne sunset cruise. The entire vacation package totaled over $80,000. I leaned back in the chair and crossed my arms. Something was fundamentally wrong. I knew my father's real estate business very well. I knew the commercial market in Atlanta had been completely stagnant for the past 18 months. His standard corporate accounts could not possibly absorb an $80,000 spontaneous vacation without triggering massive red flags with his business partners. They definitely did not have this kind of liquid cash simply sitting around in their personal checking accounts. My eyes narrowed at the bright monitor. I opened the payment confirmation documents and zoomed in on the billing details. The transaction was processed using an elite black credit card. I did not recognize the last 4 digits. I accessed a specialized financial database I used for corporate auditing and ran a trace on the bank identification number. The routing data did not lead back to my father's real estate firm. It did not link to my parents' personal bank in Atlanta. The digital footprint bounced away from the domestic banking system entirely. I followed the intricate money trail. My fingers danced over the keys, tracing the encrypted routing codes across international borders. The credit card was directly linked to a private offshore banking institution located in the Cayman Islands. It was a classic corporate ghost account, primarily used by extremely wealthy individuals to shield assets from taxes and public scrutiny. My father was running a massive shadow financial operation right under my nose. But my father was not a criminal mastermind. He was a vain, arrogant man who liked to show off his wealth at country club dinners. Establishing a complex offshore financial vehicle required a specific level of legal sophistication he simply did not possess. I needed to find the exact source of the funds. I went back to the original hidden directory and searched for the establishing documents of the offshore account. I found a compressed file labeled with a long string of numbers. I bypassed the basic password protection in seconds and extracted a high-resolution scanned copy of a legal charter. It was a formal trust fund declaration. My heart beat a steady, calm rhythm as I read the dense legal jargon. The trust had been established decades ago. It was specifically designed to hold vast amounts of liquid capital and real estate assets securely. I scrolled through the pages of legalese analyzing the financial structure of the fund. Millions of dollars had been funneled into this hidden account over the past several years. This was the endless well of money secretly funding their luxurious lifestyle. This was exactly how Jamal afforded his heavy gold watches and how Brittany drove brand new luxury cars while contributing absolutely nothing to society. They were living like royalty while treating me like dirt. I took a deep breath to steady my nerves and began pulling the transaction logs for the past 3 years. Every line item on the spreadsheet painted a disgusting picture of their lavish spending habits. They had used this secret offshore account to purchase everything. I saw regular monthly transfers paying the mortgage on Brittany and Jamal's massive waterfront property. I saw huge payments to high-end car dealerships and luxury designers. My parents had even used this fund to pay for the extravagant country club anniversary dinner, where they had publicly humiliated me just the night before. The sheer audacity of their financial crimes left me completely speechless. They were draining an enormous reservoir of wealth while constantly berating me for being a poor, lonely failure who worked a boring desk job. I felt a cold surge of pure adrenaline pumping through my veins. I reached the final section of the charter document. I needed to see who actually owned this massive fortune. I expected to see my father's name listed as the primary beneficiary. I expected to see my mother's name, or perhaps a corporate shell entity controlled by my golden child sister. I slowly scrolled down to the signatory page. My eyes locked onto the bold black text printed at the bottom of the scanned document. The air in the quiet home office suddenly felt incredibly thin. I blinked hard, refusing to believe what I was seeing. The name on the primary beneficiary account of that massive offshore trust fund was not Richard Montgomery. It was not Patricia Montgomery. The name printed in clear, undeniable letters was my own name. It was Natalie Montgomery. I stared at my own name on the screen for a long time. The letters felt like a physical blow to my chest. Natalie Montgomery. I was the sole beneficiary. I quickly pulled my personal laptop from my bag and connected it to my father's bypassed network. I initiated a stealth forensic audit utilizing the heavy-duty corporate software I used to dismantle financial crimes. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I executed scripts that ripped through the hidden layers of the offshore server. I quickly downloaded decades of heavily encrypted financial history, bypassing firewalls with cold precision. The complete archive materialized on my screen, revealing a truth so dark it made my blood run cold. My late grandfather had established this massive trust fund solely in my name to be transferred to my absolute control on my 18th birthday. It was a staggering amount of wealth meant to secure my entire future and give me the freedom to pursue any dream I desired. My grandfather had always seen my potential. He always told me I was the smart one, but I never saw a single penny of that money. When I turned 18, my parents sat me down in this exact room. Richard and Patricia had put on their most convincing masks of sorrow. They told me my grandfather's investments were heavily tied to the housing market, and the entire trust had gone completely bankrupt during the financial crash of 2008. They said there was absolutely nothing left for my college tuition or my future. They told me I had to be an adult and figure it out on my own. I remembered the crushing weight of that lie. I remembered the sheer panic of realizing I had no safety net. I spent the next 4 years working 3 different minimum wage jobs just to afford community college and basic groceries. I worked night shifts at a diner smelling like stale grease while studying for my cybersecurity exams under the dim break room lights. I took out massive student loans that I was still aggressively paying off today. I sacrificed my youth, my sleep, and my peace of mind. Meanwhile, in that exact same year, my parents handed the golden child the keys to a brand new luxury Mercedes for her high school graduation. They paid for Brittany to attend an expensive out-of-state university, where she majored in partying and dropped out after 3 semesters. They covered all her rent, all her credit card debt, and all her reckless mistakes. They constantly called me the poor sibling, the one who was struggling, the one who had to work a boring desk job just to scrape by. They watched me exhaust myself for 15 years. They mocked my modest lifestyle, and the entire time they were funding my sister's extravagant life, using the immense wealth my grandfather had explicitly left to me. I needed to know exactly how Richard pulled off this massive theft. A legitimate offshore banking institution would never allow a third party to simply withdraw millions of dollars from a secured trust without the explicit legal authorization of the primary beneficiary. I ran a deep query searching for legal verification documents from 15 years ago. The audit software flagged a specific PDF file uploaded exactly 1 week after my 18th birthday. I opened the file and my breath caught in my throat. It was a comprehensive power of attorney document, granting Richard complete and total financial control over all assets held within the trust fund. It granted him unrestricted access to wire funds, sell property, and liquidate investments on my behalf. At the bottom of the last page, right next to the notary stamp, was my signature. I leaned closer to the monitor, analyzing the strokes of the digital ink. It was an absolutely masterful and flawless forgery. Richard had perfectly replicated the way I looped my letters back then. He had falsified a federal legal document, hijacked my entire financial identity, and stolen my inheritance right out from under me. This was not just toxic family behavior. This was a severe felony, punishable by decades in federal prison. My father was a criminal masquerading as a successful businessman, and my mother was his fully complicit accomplice. I switched the audit software to display the overall health of the trust fund. I needed to see exactly how much capital remained in the offshore accounts. The system generated a series of detailed line graphs and balance sheets. When the final numbers rendered on the screen, a cold wave of genuine alarm washed over me. The trust fund was severely depleted. It was not just the Hawaii vacation or Brittany's waterfront mortgage draining the accounts. The financial hemorrhaging was catastrophic. Someone had been actively bleeding hundreds of thousands of dollars from the primary holding accounts in massive, aggressive chunks over the last 3 years. This was not typical luxury spending. This was a desperate, chaotic liquidation of assets. Large, unitemized wire transfers were being blasted to a series of domestic accounts I could not immediately identify. Millions of dollars had simply vanished into thin air, leaving the trust teetering on the edge of total insolvency. I had to find out exactly where that money was going before they completely destroyed my grandfather's legacy. I opened my command terminal and began writing a custom monitoring script. I built a digital trap designed to silently track every single keystroke and every packet of data moving through Richard's computer. I embedded the malicious code directly into his operating system, ensuring it would remain completely undetectable to his basic antivirus software. I set the parameters to alert my personal server the second any new financial transaction was initiated. The trap was perfectly set and waiting to be triggered. I cleared my digital footprint from the network and packed up my equipment. I walked out of that massive estate, knowing my family was heading straight toward total and absolute destruction. I set a digital trap to find out exactly where the money went. I was just closing my laptop when the heavy oak front door swung open. Heavy footsteps echoed across the marble foyer, followed by the unmistakable clatter of expensive metal. I stepped out of the office and saw Jamal hauling a massive set of custom titanium golf clubs into the entryway. He dropped the heavy leather bag right on the pristine floor, scraping the polished stone. He wore a crisp designer suit that looked like it cost more than my first car. His gold Rolex caught the afternoon light as he ran a hand over his perfectly trimmed beard. He looked up and spotted me standing near the office doorway. His arrogant smile immediately morphed into a look of deep annoyance. He sighed loudly and shook his head, looking me up and down with blatant disgust. I was wearing a simple pair of dark jeans and a plain black sweater. It was practical clothing for running technical audits, but to Jamal it was highly offensive. He stepped closer, entering my personal space to deliver his daily dose of humiliation. "You are seriously wearing that today?" Jamal asked, his voice echoing in the large, empty hall. "You know you are going to be watching my children tomorrow, right? I need you to dress better around my kids, Natalie. We are raising them to have standards and associate with successful people. I do not want them looking at you and thinking failure is an acceptable lifestyle choice. Put on something decent before you show up at our house." I looked at his smug face. I looked at the man who was currently living in a waterfront mansion paid for by my stolen inheritance. I felt a surge of absolute power washing over me. He had absolutely no idea that I held his entire financial existence in the palm of my hand. I offered him a polite, empty smile. "I will keep that in mind," I said softly. "I will make sure I look my absolute best tomorrow." He scoffed and turned his back on me, completely dismissing my presence. He pulled out his phone and started typing a message loudly, complaining about how the cleaning staff had not properly waxed the floors. He walked past me and headed toward the kitchen to grab a drink from my parents' expensive wine fridge. As he walked away, something beautiful happened. Jamal was a frequent visitor to this estate. His expensive smartphone was already programmed to automatically connect to my parents' home network the second he walked through the front doors. I heard the faint chime from his device confirming the connection. I stepped back into the office and quietly closed the solid oak door. I opened my laptop and woke the screen. My newly configured network trap was already flashing with active alerts. Jamal had connected to the local wireless network. Because I established administrative control over the entire routing system, I had unrestricted access to every single packet of data moving through the air. Jamal was arrogant, but incredibly careless with his digital security. He was not using a virtual private network. He was not using encrypted tunnels. He broadcasted his digital life across a network I owned. I launched a packet sniffer program and began pulling his live traffic directly into my secure drive. I watched the data stream across my monitor in real time. Jamal was checking his bank balances. He was logging into his corporate accounts using auto-saved passwords. My software intercepted the raw data packets, stripping away the basic security layers and extracting the core information. I pulled his personal banking routing numbers. I captured his corporate login credentials. I downloaded the entire financial history of his highly publicized tech startup. Jamal had spent the last 3 years bragging to everyone in Atlanta about his revolutionary software company. He claimed he was a visionary founder who had secured massive rounds of venture capital. My parents paraded him around their country club as the ultimate success story. They used his fake wealth to justify their constant humiliation of my modest lifestyle. I ran his corporate tax filings through my auditing software to verify his claims. The system processed the raw financial data and generated a comprehensive report in seconds. I stared at the final numbers on the screen. The data was absolutely flawless and completely damning. Jamal did not have a successful technology company. He did not have venture capital funding. His entire corporate empire was a complete fabrication. The tax filings revealed that his startup had generated zero revenue since its inception. The company had never sold a single product. It had never secured a single legitimate client. It was nothing more than a hollow shell company, existing only on paper to create the illusion of success. I checked the liability column of his balance sheets. The reality of his situation was far worse than simply running a fake company. Jamal took out predatory loans using the shell company as collateral. He owed money to private lenders who charged exorbitant interest rates. The debt was compounding daily, creating a massive financial sinkhole. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with terrifying clarity. Jamal was broke. He was secretly drowning in millions of dollars of high-interest corporate debt. He could not afford his expensive suits, his solid gold Rolex, or the massive mortgage on his waterfront mansion. The only reason his creditors had not dragged him into court and seized his assets was because someone was quietly paying off his minimum monthly balances. My parents were actively siphoning my grandfather's vast fortune to bail out their golden child's fraudulent husband. They were sacrificing my life to maintain their perfect family image. I closed my laptop and slid it into my bag. Jamal's highly publicized tech startup had absolutely zero revenue. It was merely a shell company teetering on the very edge of collapse. I sat in the quiet office, letting the sheer magnitude of the betrayal sink into my bones. The financial records on my screen painted a grotesque portrait of my family. I cross-referenced the wire transfers from my grandfather's offshore trust fund with the incoming deposits on Jamal's corporate ledgers. The dates and amounts matched perfectly down to the very last cent. My parents had been siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars from my stolen inheritance and routing the money directly into Jamal's failing shell company. They were systematically draining my future to secretly fund his fake millionaire lifestyle. My mind flashed back to every family dinner over the past 3 years. I remembered sitting at long mahogany tables listening to my mother praise Brittany for marrying such a driven and successful entrepreneur. I remembered my father clapping Jamal on the back, loudly congratulating him on his latest round of venture capital funding. They had all looked at me with varying degrees of pity and disgust. They called me the poor and single daughter who chose a boring desk job over real ambition. They constantly reminded me that I lacked the charisma and drive to build a life of luxury. They told me I would never understand the pressure of running a massive empire. Every single insult they hurled at me was a calculated projection. Their entire world was a carefully constructed theater of lies. Brittany's pristine waterfront mansion, her custom luxury vehicles, and her closet full of designer clothes were all paid for by the money my grandfather had explicitly left to me. My parents were so obsessed with protecting their golden child from the embarrassment of a failed marriage that they willingly committed federal financial fraud. They knew Jamal was a complete fraud. They knew he was drowning in high-interest debt from predatory private lenders. Instead of letting his fake empire collapse and allowing Brittany to face the consequences of marrying a con artist, my parents chose to sacrifice my life to keep up their appearances. They sacrificed my college years, my peace of mind, and my financial security, just to ensure their country club friends would continue to envy their perfect family. The sheer audacity of their hypocrisy made my hands tremble over the keyboard. I had spent 15 years believing I was the absolute disappointment of the family. I had internalized every cruel remark and every condescending glance. I had worked myself to the point of absolute exhaustion, trying to prove my worth to people who were secretly living off my stolen wealth. My money paid for the expensive tailored suit Jamal was currently wearing in my parents' kitchen. My money paid for the heavy gold watch he flashed while mocking my practical clothes. I was the sole financial pillar holding up their entire glamorous existence. They were nothing but highly dressed parasites feeding off the legacy my grandfather built for me. I needed to ensure my digital trap captured every single piece of evidence before I finalized my exit strategy. I navigated back to my father's main desktop interface, verifying that my surveillance scripts were running silently in the background. My auditing software had finished downloading the last batch of offshore bank statements I was preparing to wipe my digital footprint from the local network when a new notification flashed across my screen. It was an automated alert from a secure email server my father kept hidden behind a secondary firewall. My professional curiosity took over instantly. I bypassed the weak security protocol and accessed the inbox. The most recent email had arrived just 10 minutes ago, marked with a high-priority red flag. It was from a private commercial lending firm based in Texas. I opened the message and found a massive legal document attached. It was a formal wire transfer authorization form, demanding immediate execution. I downloaded the document and scanned the dense financial jargon. The details of the contract made my blood run incredibly cold. Jamal's creditors had apparently lost their patience entirely. The predatory lenders were demanding an immediate lump sum payment to cover the massive interest penalties accumulating on his corporate debt. If the payment was not received by the end of the business week, they would initiate hostile asset seizures and pursue criminal fraud charges against Jamal's fake technology company. My parents were completely backed into a corner. They had drained the liquid cash from my offshore trust fund, and now they needed a massive injection of capital to prevent their golden son-in-law from going to federal prison. I scrolled down to the execution orders of the wire transfer document. My father was attempting to authorize a catastrophic financial maneuver. He was preparing to leverage the final untouched asset remaining in my grandfather's trust fund. It was a highly valuable plot of undeveloped commercial real estate located in downtown Austin. The property had been appreciating in value for decades and was completely unencumbered by debt. My father was attempting to place a massive predatory lien on my land to generate the immediate cash required to save Jamal. I stared at the final figure printed at the bottom of the authorization form. The amount they were attempting to borrow against my property was absolutely staggering. It was exactly $2 million. If this wire transfer executed successfully, my last remaining asset would be entirely wiped out, and I would legally be on the hook for a $2 million debt to a ruthless private lending syndicate. I checked the status of the authorization document. It was fully prepared and waiting in a digital holding queue. It only required one final element to become a legally binding financial execution. It required the authorized digital signature of the primary beneficiary. It required my forged signature. My parents were actively preparing to destroy my life forever. They had stolen my past, and now they were attempting to completely steal my future. But I was not going to let them succeed. I urgently needed to understand exactly how my father planned to execute this catastrophic financial maneuver. I quickly minimized the authorization form and dug much deeper into the hidden email client. My father had stupidly used a very basic encryption key for his communications with the private lending syndicate. I easily broke through the cipher in less than a single minute. A long chain of urgent messages populated my screen, revealing a timeline of pure desperation. The emails were sent back and forth between my father and a shady private financier based in Honolulu. As I read through the frantic digital exchanges, the truth about their upcoming vacation snapped into focus. The grand announcement at the anniversary dinner was nothing but a massive, elaborate smokescreen. My parents were not flying the entire family to a luxury resort just to celebrate 40 years of marriage. They were flying across the Pacific Ocean because the shadow financier demanded a face-to-face meeting to finalize the high-risk transaction. Jamal and my father had to be physically present to execute the final stage of their massive financial crime. The lender was a ruthless operator who specialized in hard money loans and distressed assets. He knew Jamal's tech startup was a complete sham. He knew my father was acting as a desperate guarantor. The emails showed that Jamal's original creditors were tired of waiting for their money. They had officially issued a final ultimatum. If Jamal did not produce $2 million by the end of the month, they were going to file formal criminal charges for wire fraud and misrepresentation. Jamal would be facing federal prison time, and the ensuing scandal would completely destroy my parents' carefully curated social reputation. To save their golden son-in-law from a prison cell, my father had offered up the very last pristine asset in my grandfather's trust fund. I read the legal attachments outlining the collateral. It was a massive tract of highly valuable commercial real estate situated in the heart of downtown Austin, Texas. My grandfather had purchased the land decades ago, anticipating the city's explosive economic growth. The commercial zone had recently exploded in value. The Texas property had remained completely untouched, outperforming every other asset in the portfolio. It was worth millions, and it legally belonged entirely to me. My father was using his forged power of attorney to offer my land as collateral for a $2 million lien. The Honolulu financier had agreed to provide the immediate cash to pay off Jamal's angry creditors. But the terms of the loan were absolutely predatory. The interest rates were astronomical, and the default clauses were designed to seize the property almost immediately. My father did not care about the terms because he never intended to pay the money back. He was simply throwing my inheritance into the fire to buy Jamal his freedom. If the loan went into default, the lenders would seize my property, and if the asset value somehow fell short, I would be held personally liable for the remaining balance. They were going to chain me to a $2 million anchor and drown my entire future. The sheer evil of their plot was breathtaking. They were willing to completely destroy my life to protect a man who lied to everyone. The final email in the chain contained the exact logistical instructions for the upcoming meeting in Hawaii. The financier demanded wet signatures on the physical documents. He required my father to present the original power of attorney and sign the lien authorization in his office in Honolulu. Once the ink dried on those pages, the wire transfer would be instantly released to Jamal's creditors, and the debt would permanently attach to my name. My heart hammered against my ribs as I looked at the date and time of the scheduled meeting. It was set for the very morning after they arrived on the island. I checked the digital clock in the corner of my laptop screen. My family was currently packing their designer luggage and bragging to their friends about their tropical getaway. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect crime. They believed they were about to secure their freedom by sacrificing my life. I stared at the flashing cursor on the screen, calculating the exact amount of time I had left to stop them. Their flight departed in exactly 72 hours. I needed to move fast if I was going to dismantle their operation. I copied the entire email thread directly to my secure encrypted drive, making sure I captured every single piece of correspondence between my father and the private lender. I downloaded the attached legal documents, the draft of the commercial lien, the fraudulent power of attorney papers, and the wire transfer instructions. I gathered the digital evidence meticulously, creating an undeniable trail of premeditated financial crimes. Every file I secured was another nail in their collective coffin. I was no longer just the scapegoat daughter they could easily discard and mock at fancy dinners. I was the architect of their impending destruction. They had vastly underestimated my professional skills and my absolute refusal to be their victim any longer. I closed the hidden directory and scrubbed my digital access logs from the network router. I reset the security cameras exactly as my mother had aggressively demanded that morning. They would be able to monitor the empty estate from the beautiful beaches of Maui just like they wanted, but they would not be seeing the paradise they had envisioned. They would be walking straight into a meticulously planned trap. I packed my equipment into my bag and stood up from the heavy oak desk. The quiet house felt completely different now. It was no longer a place of childhood humiliation. It was the staging ground for a massive reckoning. I walked out of the luxurious office and locked the front door behind me. I had exactly 72 hours to end this completely. I drove straight from the estate back to my small apartment and shifted into a state of absolute hyper-focus. The countdown clock in my head was ticking loudly, but I knew I could not afford a single mistake. If I showed any signs of anger or suspicion, my family might panic and alter their timeline. I had to play my role perfectly. I had to be the obedient, submissive daughter they expected to see. The next evening, I arrived at my parents' house carrying bags of groceries. I had volunteered to cook a lavish farewell dinner for the entire family before their flight. My mother did not even look up from her phone when I walked through the front door. She simply waved her hand toward the kitchen and told me not to burn the roast. I tied an apron over my clothes and spent the next 3 hours preparing a gourmet meal. I chopped vegetables, seasoned the meat, and set the long dining room table with their finest crystal and silver. I listened to their joyful laughter echoing from the living room as they discussed their upcoming luxury vacation. They were celebrating a trip funded entirely by my stolen inheritance, but I did not let a single ounce of resentment show on my face. I served them dinner with a polite smile, pouring expensive wine into their glasses and quietly clearing their dirty plates while they completely ignored my presence. After dinner, Brittany summoned me upstairs to her old childhood bedroom. She was surrounded by open designer suitcases, throwing expensive silk dresses and luxury swimsuits across the bed. She ordered me to help her pack, complaining loudly about how stressful it was to organize a 2-week tropical vacation. I stood quietly folding her clothes and carefully placing them into her luggage. She tossed a pair of designer heels onto the floor near my feet and sighed dramatically. "You really need to fix your attitude before we leave, Natalie," she said, crossing her arms. "You have had this depressing vibe all week and it is bringing down my energy. I need you to be positive while you are watching my kids. Jamal and I cannot be stressing out on the beach because you are miserable in your tiny apartment." I knelt down to pick up the shoes, keeping my head lowered so she could not see my eyes. "I just want everything to be perfect for your trip," I said, maintaining a soft, subservient tone. Brittany rolled her eyes and turned back to the mirror to fix her hair. "Just make sure you go over to our house and deep clean the kids' rooms before Jamal drops them off tomorrow morning," she commanded. "They need a clean environment, and I know you have nothing else going on. Do not forget to scrub the baseboards either." I nodded my head obediently. "I will make sure everything is spotless for them," I replied, offering her another perfectly crafted, empty smile. As I stood there folding her stolen luxury garments, my right hand slipped into the pocket of my jeans. My fingers closed tightly around the small metallic flash drive hidden inside. It felt warm against my palm. As she stood there berating me and treating me like her personal maid, she had absolutely no idea that the tiny device in my pocket contained every single ounce of their financial ruin. It held the forged power of attorney, the offshore routing numbers, and the emails proving their massive criminal conspiracy. I gripped the drive, feeling an incredible sense of absolute power. I let her complain about my depressing vibe while I mentally calculated the exact moment her entire fake empire would shatter into a million pieces. I finished packing her bag, zipped the heavy luggage shut, and carried the suitcases down the grand staircase. I loaded them into the trunk of his waiting car, wiping a smudge of dirt off the bumper just to complete the illusion of my total submission. My father walked past me, handing me a list of emergency contacts and reminding me to water the indoor plants. I promised him I would handle every single chore on his list. I wished them a wonderful evening and finally walked out the front door. I stepped out into the cool night air and walked directly to my car. The moment I closed the car door, the submissive scapegoat persona completely vanished. My posture straightened and my heart rate steadied into a calm, calculated rhythm. The game of playing the fool was officially over. Now it was time to unleash the predator. I started the engine and drove away from the wealthy neighborhood, navigating the dark streets until I reached a highly secure corporate parking garage downtown. I parked my car in a blind spot, avoiding the main security cameras. I pulled out a secondary encrypted mobile phone that I only used for highly sensitive auditing communications. I dialed a specific number and waited as it rang. I was not calling the local police. Local authorities would take weeks to investigate a complex offshore financial web, and by then the massive wire transfer in Honolulu would already be finalized. I needed someone who could move with aggressive, devastating speed. I needed a shark. The line connected, and a deep, raspy voice answered on the second ring. I had worked with him on a massive corporate embezzlement case 2 years ago. He was a ruthless federal financial fraud attorney who specialized in freezing illegal offshore assets without warning. "I have a massive case for you." I said, my voice echoing in the quiet car. Multiple felonies, including wire fraud, forged power of attorney, and offshore tax evasion involving millions of dollars. I need an emergency federal injunction, and I need it executed within exactly 48 hours. He asked for my location immediately. I am coming directly to your private office right now, I replied softly, ending the quick phone call. The drive to the financial district took 20 minutes, but my adrenaline made it feel like seconds. I pulled into the underground garage of a towering glass and steel high-rise. The building was almost entirely empty at this late hour, but the top floor was illuminated. That was where Victor Grant operated his boutique federal litigation firm. Victor was a former federal prosecutor who had built a terrifying reputation for dismantling massive financial syndicates. He was exactly the apex predator I needed to execute this strike. I took the private elevator straight to his penthouse office. The doors opened directly into a sleek, minimalist reception area. Victor was already waiting for me, standing behind a massive slab of black marble that served as his conference table. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, and his sharp gray eyes immediately locked onto my face. We did not waste time with pleasantries or small talk. I walked straight across the dark hardwood floor and slid the metallic flash drive across the polished stone surface. It stopped right in front of his hands. I sat down in the leather chair opposite him and crossed my legs. He picked up the device and plugged it into a heavily secured standalone terminal on his desk. His fingers moved quickly across his mechanical keyboard as he bypassed my secondary security protocols. I watched his eyes track across the large monitors as the hidden directory decoded itself. I had organized the evidence meticulously. The first folder contained the original trust documents established by my grandfather alongside the current offshore bank statements. The second folder held the forged power of attorney. The third contained the intercepted traffic from Jamal showing his failing shell company and predatory loans. The final folder contained the smoking gun, which was the email chain detailing the imminent $2 million land lien and the scheduled meeting in Honolulu. Victor was a man who had seen billions of dollars stolen during his career, but as he scrolled through the raw data, I saw his jaw clench. He opened the high-resolution scan of the forged signature and placed it side by side with a legitimate sample of my handwriting from 15 years ago. He zoomed in on the digital ink, analyzing the stroke velocity and pen pressure. "It is a very confident forgery," Victor noted, his deep voice filling the quiet room. "Whoever executed this had practiced replicating your specific baseline loops. But it is still a forgery, and the metadata attached to the original upload directly matches your father's personal Internet Protocol address. We have absolute digital proof that Richard generated and submitted this fraudulent document from his home network." He closed the image and opened the financial ledgers. He cross-referenced the massive outgoing wire transfers from the Cayman Islands with the incoming deposits hitting Jamal's corporate accounts. A low whistle escaped his lips. "They are bleeding the trust completely dry to prop up a dead corporate entity," Victor said. "Your brother-in-law is drowning in millions of dollars of toxic debt, and your parents are liquidating your grandfather's legacy just to keep him afloat. This is an incredibly reckless conspiracy." I nodded slowly. "It gets worse," I said, pointing to the final folder. "Open the Hawaii correspondence." Victor clicked the file and his eyes rapidly scanned the urgent emails between my father and the private lender. He read the terms of the proposed commercial real estate lien. The magnitude of the immediate threat became instantly clear to him. "They are trying to borrow $2 million against your pristine Texas property," Victor summarized, his voice sharp with professional outrage. "If they sign this collateral agreement, your last remaining asset will be frozen by a syndicate of hard money lenders. You will be legally bound to a catastrophic debt, and the cash will vanish into Jamal's failed enterprise the second the wire clears. They are flying out in less than 3 days to execute the final signatures in person." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cold marble table. "Can we stop the transaction before they land in Hawaii?" I asked. "I want the entire operation dismantled, and I want every single stolen asset locked down." Victor leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. A dangerous predatory smile slowly spread across his face. We are not just going to stop the transaction, Natalie. We are going to sever their entire financial existence. To do this correctly, we need to file an emergency ex parte motion for a federal injunction. An ex parte motion means we go directly to a federal judge without notifying your parents or their legal counsel. We present this mountain of digital evidence proving imminent financial harm and wire fraud. Given the irrefutable IP logs and the pending $2 million theft, any federal judge will instantly grant a temporary restraining order freezing all associated accounts. He tapped a pen against his desk, calculating the timeline. The key to an ex parte injunction is the element of absolute surprise, Victor explained. If they catch wind of this action even an hour early, they could panic and wire the remaining offshore funds to untraceable cryptocurrency wallets. We cannot allow them any opportunity to hide the remaining capital. We must control the exact moment the trap snaps shut. I understood his strategy completely. When do we execute the strike? I asked. Victor looked at the flight itinerary displayed on his monitor. We prepare the federal filings tonight and tomorrow. We present the motion to the judge early Friday morning. We will have the execution orders signed and ready to deploy by noon. But we do not trigger the banking freeze immediately. We wait until the very last possible second. We wait until they check their bags, clear terminal security, and sit down in the departure lounge. We let them believe they have won. We execute the injunction at the exact moment they try to leave the state. The morning of the flight arrived with a heavy blanket of humidity settling over Atlanta. The sun was barely up, but I had already been awake for hours, reviewing the final legal filings Victor had securely messaged to my phone. Everything was perfectly aligned. The federal judge had reviewed our ex parte motion the previous afternoon and found our digital evidence of wire fraud and forged signatures completely irrefutable. The emergency injunction was signed sealed and waiting in a secure holding pattern. It was a digital guillotine hanging directly over my family's stolen wealth. I just had to wait for the absolute perfect moment to drop the blade. I stood in the small kitchen of my modest apartment, brewing a strong pot of coffee and waiting for the golden child to arrive. At precisely 8 in the morning, the aggressive roar of a high-performance engine shattered the quiet peace of my neighborhood. I looked out the window and watched Jamal pull his sleek black Porsche Cayenne into my narrow driveway. The luxury vehicle was a jarring contrast against the modest sedans parked along my street. I felt a cold surge of satisfaction knowing that every single payment on that expensive German machine had been fraudulently drained from my offshore trust fund. Jamal stepped out of the driver's seat, adjusting his custom travel blazer. Brittany emerged from the passenger side, wearing a pristine white silk tracksuit and oversized designer sunglasses that obscured half her face. She looked like a celebrity, preparing to board a private jet, rather than a woman whose husband was secretly $2 million in debt to predatory lenders. They opened the rear doors and pulled out their 3 young children, handing them small designer backpacks. I opened my front door and stepped out onto the small concrete porch, projecting an aura of complete submission. "Good morning," I said, offering a bright, empty smile. Brittany did not even bother to greet me. She marched up the concrete steps and pushed past me into my living room, her eyes scanning my practical furniture with blatant distaste. "It smells like cheap coffee in here," she complained, waving a perfectly manicured hand in front of her face. "I brought some organic air purifiers in the kids' bags. Make sure you plug them in, Natalie. I do not want them breathing whatever is in this apartment." Jamal followed her inside, carrying 2 massive bags of toys and expensive organic snacks. He dropped the heavy bags onto my modest sofa, treating my home like a cheap storage locker. He reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a thick stack of printed papers stapled together at the corner. He shoved the heavy packet directly against my chest, forcing me to take it. I looked down at the documents. It was a highly detailed, meticulously formatted schedule. Jamal had mapped out every single hour of my week. He had included a degrading list of manual chores he expected me to complete while babysitting his children. The list demanded I scrub their baseboards, organize their digital photo albums, and meal prep organic lunches for the upcoming month. "Do not mess this up, Natalie," Jamal sneered, his dark eyes looking down at me with absolute contempt. We put a lot of effort into making sure you know exactly what to do. The kids have a very strict dietary schedule and a rigorous enrichment routine. They are not used to living in a place this small or this basic, so you need to work twice as hard to keep them properly entertained. I do not want to come back from Hawaii and find out you let them sit around watching television all day, just because you are lazy. I looked at the printed list of chores, and then I looked at the heavy gold Rolex gleaming on his wrist. It took every ounce of professional restraint I possessed to stop myself from laughing directly in his arrogant face. He was ordering me to scrub his floors while secretly using my stolen inheritance to fund his fake technology empire. He was treating me like an unpaid servant hours before a federal judge froze every single bank account tied to his fraudulent name. I folded the degrading list and tucked it into the pocket of my jeans. "I will follow your instructions, Jamal," I said, maintaining my soft, subservient tone. "You and Brittany just focus on having an amazing vacation in Hawaii. Do not worry about a single thing back here." Brittany checked her reflection in the hallway mirror and sighed heavily. "We really need to get to the airport lounge," she announced, turning toward the door. "The private car service is meeting Mom and Dad at the international terminal in 45 minutes. She leaned down and gave her 3 children quick, distracted hugs. "Be good for your aunt," she told them. "We will bring you back some expensive souvenirs from the resort." I knelt down on the worn carpet and pulled my 2 nephews and my niece into a warm hug. I kissed each of them gently on the forehead. They were innocent children, completely unaware of the massive financial crimes their parents had committed. They did not deserve to be collateral damage in the explosive federal reckoning that was about to occur. I stood up and followed Brittany and Jamal out to the driveway. I stood on the damp concrete and waved enthusiastically as they climbed back into the stolen luxury Porsche. The powerful engine roared to life, and Jamal sped off down the street, aggressively weaving through the morning traffic. I watched the sleek red taillights disappear around the corner, heading straight toward the international airport and their ultimate destruction. The moment their car vanished from my line of sight, the submissive aunt persona completely evaporated. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my secure mobile phone. I dialed a local number and waited for the connection. "Bring them in," I said. Less than 60 seconds after I made the call, 2 sleek black sedans turned the corner and pulled into my narrow driveway, parking exactly where Jamal had just been. 2 women stepped out of the vehicles, moving with a crisp, professional efficiency that instantly put me at ease. These were not local teenagers looking for extra summer cash. They were elite, highly trained, and fully bonded professional nannies sourced from a premier domestic staffing agency in Atlanta. I had personally vetted their backgrounds, reviewing their extensive credentials in childhood development and emergency response protocols. I needed absolute perfection today, and I was more than willing to pay for it. I opened the front door and ushered them inside. The older woman introduced herself as Anna, while the younger introduced herself as Maria. I quickly handed them a sealed envelope containing their contracts and their payment. I used my own legitimate hard-earned money from my corporate auditing career to secure their services. I was paying them triple their premium agency rate for absolute discretion and round the clock. Care for the next week, I wanted to ensure my nieces and nephews received the highest standard of attention, while the adult world completely collapsed around them. I watched as they reviewed the contracts, nodding in agreement. There was no stolen trust fund money involved in this transaction. Every single dollar came from the long, exhausting hours I spent dismantling financial crimes. My niece and nephews were sitting on the couch, looking slightly confused by the sudden arrival of strangers in my small apartment. I walked over and knelt in front of them, offering a genuine smile. "I know your parents told you that you would be staying here with me for the week." I began, keeping my voice light and excited. "But I actually have a massive surprise for you guys. We are not staying in this apartment. You 3 are going on your very own top-secret luxury vacation." The kids immediately perked up, their eyes widening with curiosity. I pointed to Anna and Maria. "These 2 amazing ladies are going to be your personal guides for the week. I booked a massive luxury family suite at the Grand Resort downtown. The suite has a huge living room, video game consoles, and a balcony. But the best part is that the hotel has a massive indoor water park with a lazy river and giant slides. You get unlimited access to the entire park starting right now. The children erupted into cheers, jumping off the couch with pure, unfiltered joy. They grabbed their small designer backpacks, completely forgetting about the miserable week they thought they were going to spend trapped in my apartment. I watched their happy faces and felt a deep wave of protective relief wash over my chest. Jamal and Brittany were terrible, toxic people who deserved every single ounce of the federal reckoning coming their way. They were thieves and liars who used my grandfather's legacy to fund their fake empire. But these three children were completely innocent. They had no idea their entire financial reality was built on a massive foundation of stolen money and predatory debt. I refused to let these innocent kids suffer for the sins of their greedy parents. I refused to let them sit in my living room and witness the explosive fallout when the federal injunction finally hit. They did not deserve to see their father humiliated or their mother spiraling into a total panic when their credit cards inevitably declined at the airport. They deserved to be safe, distracted, and blissfully happy, while the adults dealt with the devastating consequences of their own actions. Anna and Maria expertly took control of the situation, organizing the luggage and guiding the excited children toward the waiting sedans. I handed Anna a detailed emergency dossier containing their medical information and dietary needs, ensuring they would be perfectly cared for without needing to contact Jamal or Brittany. I stood on my small concrete porch and waved as the children piled into the cars, their faces pressed against the windows with bright, excited smiles. I watched the two black vehicles back out of my driveway and disappear down the street, heading straight toward the luxury hotel. The moment the street was empty, I walked back inside my apartment and firmly locked the front door. The absolute silence of the space felt incredibly powerful. I walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up the thick stack of printed papers Jamal had aggressively shoved into my chest just an hour ago. I stared at his degrading, micromanaged list of household chores. He wanted me to spend my entire week scrubbing his baseboards and preparing organic meals while he flew to Honolulu to steal a $2 million commercial property under my name. I calmly folded the massive stack of papers in half and dropped it directly into the kitchen trash can. I walked into my bedroom and began to shed the submissive scapegoat persona. For the very last time, I pulled off the faded jeans and the plain, oversized sweater I had worn specifically to feed their arrogant delusions of superiority. I opened my closet and reached for the corporate armor I wore when dismantling corrupt executives. I slipped into a crisp white silk blouse and pulled on a sharp, tailored charcoal blazer that fit me perfectly. I stepped into a pair of sleek black heels that clicked with authority against the hardwood floor. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The poor, lonely failure of a sister was completely gone. In her place stood a lethal corporate auditor ready to execute a massive financial strike. I reached into my bag and pulled out my secure encrypted phone. I checked the tracking application, monitoring the global positioning signal of my parents' vehicle. They were currently pulling into the international terminal. I grabbed my car keys and walked out the door. It is time to hunt. I slid into the driver's seat of my practical sedan and pressed the ignition button. The engine hummed to life, a quiet sound matching my internal rhythm. I mounted my encrypted phone to the dashboard console, pulling up the location tracking software. Two red dots pulsed against the digital map of the Atlanta metropolitan area. One dot represented my father's mobile device, and the other tracked Jamal's luxury vehicle. I watched the digital markers inch along the interstate highway, heading directly toward the International Departures Terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. They moved swiftly through morning traffic, completely unaware their financial universe was about to violently collapse around them. I merged onto the highway, keeping a safe distance behind their projected route. The drive usually felt tedious, but today the miles flew by in a blur of sharp focus and pure adrenaline. I gripped the leather steering wheel, feeling the smooth texture against my palms. For 15 years I had driven these same roads, feeling like a heavy burden to my family. I attended their lavish parties and swallowed cruel insults while bearing the crushing weight of student loans. They constantly reminded me of my perceived inferiority, projecting their own insecurities onto my quiet life. Now the power dynamic was undergoing a seismic permanent shift. I was no longer the helpless scapegoat rushing to fulfill their degrading demands. I was an elite corporate auditor executing a flawless financial strike. As I approached the airport exit, my encrypted phone vibrated against the dashboard mount. A highly secure caller identification number flashed across the bright screen. I tapped the green icon to accept the incoming audio transmission. The raspy voice of my fraud attorney, Victor Grant, filled the interior of my vehicle. "We have absolute confirmation, Natalie," he announced, his tone sharp and saturated with professional satisfaction. I just walked out of the private chambers of the federal magistrate. The judge reviewed the digital evidence, the offshore routing numbers, and the forged power of attorney documents. He did not hesitate for a single second. "The emergency ex parte motion has been officially signed and legally stamped. We have the federal injunction firmly in hand." A heavy breath escaped my lungs, releasing years of suppressed anxiety and managed tension. The immense weight of their deception was finally lifting off my shoulders. I kept my eyes locked on the road, maneuvering my car into the lane for international parking. "Are the execution orders ready to deploy?" I asked, maintaining my cold professional composure. "They are fully loaded and actively holding at the primary gateways," Victor confirmed. "We are completely synchronized with the federal banking authorities and the corporate fraud division. We just need to give the final signal." I glanced at the glowing red tracking dots on my dashboard display. My parents and my sister's family had officially reached the airport complex. Their markers stopped moving, indicating they had parked their stolen luxury vehicles and were entering the departure terminal. "They are inside the building," I told Victor. "They are preparing to clear the premium security checkpoint and head toward the first-class luxury lounge." "Do it. Execute the strike right now." I heard the sharp rhythmic clacking of Victor's mechanical keyboard over the audio connection. He was personally initiating the final command sequence. "The digital guillotine is dropping, Natalie," he stated firmly. "At this exact second, federal agents are transmitting the emergency injunction directly to the central clearinghouses. Every single domestic checking account, savings portfolio, and corporate credit line linked to Richard, Patricia, and Jamal is instantly locked down. The offshore routing numbers have been completely severed from the global financial network. We have initiated a total absolute asset freeze across all affiliated banking institutions. The charges have been officially filed as massive wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and criminal conspiracy. Your father and brother-in-law do not have access to a single penny. Their credit cards are effectively useless pieces of plastic. They cannot withdraw cash, they cannot authorize wire transfers, and they certainly cannot board a luxury flight to Honolulu. Their entire fake empire has just been wiped off the financial map." "Excellent," I replied, keeping my voice incredibly steady. "Thank you for your flawless execution, Victor. I will handle the physical confrontation from here." I ended the encrypted phone call and guided my sedan into the concrete structure of the hourly parking garage. I found an empty spot near the elevator bank and turned off the engine. The sudden silence inside the vehicle was deafening, but it was quickly replaced by the loud pounding of my own heart. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting the collar of my sharp charcoal blazer. I looked exactly like the highly paid corporate executive I truly was. I grabbed my leather briefcase containing the thick stack of printed federal documents and stepped out of the car. The heavy air of the parking garage smelled of exhaust fumes and aviation fuel. I walked toward the glass elevators, my black heels clicking a steady, commanding rhythm against the cold concrete floor. I rode the elevator down to the pedestrian bridge and crossed over into the bustling international departure terminal. The massive building was filled with the chaotic energy of travelers rushing toward their respective destinations. I checked the large digital departure board hanging from the high ceiling. The direct flight to Maui was clearly listed, showing the boarding process would begin in exactly 45 minutes. The clock was aggressively ticking down to their scheduled departure time today. My family truly believed they were about 50 minutes away from permanently escaping with my $2 million commercial property. They believed they had successfully fooled the entire world. I tightened my grip on the leather handle of my briefcase, feeling the weight of the evidence inside. I strode purposefully through the automatic sliding glass doors of the premium departure terminal, ready to watch their arrogant illusions completely shatter into a million irreparable pieces. I bypassed the chaotic maze of standard passenger lines, walking straight toward the premium security checkpoint. My known traveler credential granted immediate access to the expedited lane. I placed my leather briefcase onto the conveyor belt and stepped through the metal detector. Security cleared me in under 2 minutes, allowing me to proceed directly into the international departure concourse. I navigated wide corridors, moving past duty-free shops, until I reached the secluded entrance of the elite first-class terminal. The VIP lounge was a fortress of exclusivity, hidden behind frosted glass doors and flanked by polished bronze stanchions. It was designed specifically to separate the ultra-wealthy from the general public, offering a sanctuary of absolute privacy. I knew exactly what my family was doing behind those frosted doors. They were lounging in plush leather armchairs, clinking crystal flutes, and celebrating their brilliant financial maneuver. My father was likely boasting about his real estate prowess, while my mother criticized the attire of other travelers. Brittany and Jamal were definitely taking curated photos for their social media followers, pretending their lifestyle was built on hard work instead of my stolen inheritance. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they had successfully discarded the ugly single failure of a daughter and secured their golden future. I approached the polished marble reception desk guarding the entrance. A concierge looked up from her computer terminal, offering a practiced, welcoming smile. "Good morning," she said politely. "May I see your first-class boarding pass today?" "I do not have a boarding pass," I replied, my voice projecting calm authority. "However, I need you to page one of your guests to the front desk immediately. It is urgent corporate business, and he needs to address it before his flight boards." The concierge frowned, her customer service smile faltering. "I apologize, madam, but we do not page guests for outside visitors unless it is a verified emergency. We value the privacy of our premium travelers." I placed my leather briefcase on the marble counter and leaned forward. "The man you need to page is Richard Montgomery," I stated, holding her gaze. "He is traveling with a party heading to Honolulu. If you do not page him right now, federal financial investigators are going to walk through those glass doors in 10 minutes and publicly escort him out in handcuffs. I am giving him the professional courtesy of handling this quietly at the front desk, before a federal scene disrupts your other premium guests." The concierge blanched visibly, swallowing hard as she processed my words. The threat of federal agents disrupting the tranquil environment of her luxury lounge was highly effective. She did not ask any further questions. She quickly tapped a sequence of commands into her computer terminal and picked up the sleek telephone receiver on her desk. She pressed a button connecting directly to the internal paging system, broadcast exclusively inside the premium lounge. "Mr. Richard Montgomery," she announced, her voice echoing softly through the hidden speakers. "Mr. Richard Montgomery, please report to the front reception desk immediately regarding your travel itinerary." I stepped back from the marble counter and positioned myself perfectly in the center of the entranceway. I stood tall, my posture radiating absolute control. I adjusted the lapels of my tailored charcoal blazer and waited. The seconds stretched out, building a thick, heavy tension in the air. Through the frosted glass, I finally detected movement. The heavy double doors slid open with a soft, mechanical hiss. My father stepped out of the luxury lounge and into the reception area. He looked incredibly annoyed by the sudden interruption to his celebratory morning. He was wearing a custom-tailored resort suit, holding a half-empty glass of expensive champagne in his right hand. He was expecting to find a lowly airline representative informing him of a minor gate change or a luggage handling issue. He was expecting to bark a few harsh orders, throw around his frequent flyer status, and immediately returned to his luxurious seat. Instead, he walked straight into me. Richard stopped dead in his tracks. The annoyance on his face instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. His eyes widened as they took in my appearance. He stared at my expensive tailored blazer, my crisp silk blouse, and my polished leather heels. He looked at my face, searching for the submissive, depressed girl he had ordered to scrub baseboards just 2 hours ago. He found absolutely nothing but cold, calculating power, staring back at him. Natalie. He breathed, his voice barely a whisper. The crystal champagne flute in his hand trembled slightly, causing pale liquid to slosh. What are you doing here? Why are you dressed like that? Where are Jamal's children? I did not blink. I did not flinch. I simply looked at the man who had stolen my future to fund a lie. Your grandchildren are currently swimming at an indoor water park under the supervision of 2 bonded professional nannies, I replied, my voice echoing coldly across the marble floor. And I am here, Richard, because your flight to Hawaii has officially been canceled. His eyes darted frantically around the reception area, looking for the children he assumed I had irresponsibly dragged along to the busy airport. He still could not grasp the fundamental truth of the situation. He still believed he was the commanding patriarch, dealing with a disobedient child who had lost her mind. He shifted his weight, trying to summon his usual domineering energy, but his broad shoulders betrayed him by sagging slightly under the intense weight of my unrelenting stare. My father opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The absolute reality of my presence was breaking him. The ugly college dropout, the miserable spinster, the family disappointment was standing before him as a corporate executioner. He was looking at the architect of his total ruin, and he did not even realize the trap had already snapped completely shut. The frosted glass doors of the VIP lounge slid open again with a sharp mechanical hiss. My mother marched through the entryway with Jamal and Brittany close on her heels. Patricia's face was flushed with anger, her eyes immediately locking onto me with fierce disapproval. She had clearly grown impatient waiting for my father to return and decided to handle whatever minor inconvenience was delaying their champagne celebration. When she saw me standing there in my tailored corporate suit, her carefully maintained country club composure shattered instantly. "What in the world are you doing here?" Patricia demanded, her voice shrill and echoing across the marble floor. "You are supposed to be at the apartment scrubbing the baseboards like we asked you to do." Before I could even formulate a response, Jamal pushed past my parents. His face was twisted with aggressive rage. He stepped dangerously close to me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me into submission. The heavy gold Rolex on his wrist caught the harsh overhead lighting as he pointed a threatening finger directly at my face. "Who is watching my kids?" Jamal yelled, his voice booming through the reception area and drawing the attention of several wealthy travelers passing by. "I gave you a very specific list of instructions, Natalie. If you left my children alone in your cheap apartment just to come here and throw a pathetic tantrum, I swear I will make you pay for it." Brittany stood behind him, crossing her arms over her pristine white silk tracksuit. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust. "You are so incredibly selfish, Natalie," she sneered. "We are trying to enjoy a luxury family vacation, and you just could not handle being left out. You had to come here and ruin our morning with your miserable, depressing energy. Go back to your sad little desk job and leave us alone." I did not flinch. I stood my ground, looking at them with pure, unadulterated calm. "Your children are perfectly safe, Jamal," I replied, my voice steady. "They are at a luxury hotel water park being supervised by 2 highly credentialed professional nannies. I paid for their care using my own legitimate money because, unlike you, I do not steal to fund my lifestyle." Jamal's eyes narrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" he scoffed. "You are a broke spinster who can barely afford rent." My father finally found his voice. He reached out and grabbed my mother's arm, pulling her back slightly. "Patricia, stop," he warned, his voice trembling. "Something is wrong here. Look at her." Patricia yanked her arm away from his grasp, entirely oblivious to the warning signs. "I do not care how she is dressed, Richard," she snapped. I want her removed from this airport immediately. She turned to the marble reception desk and slammed her hand against the polished stone. Call security, she ordered the lounge concierge. This woman is harassing my family and I want her escorted out of the building right now. The concierge, a consummate professional who had been silently watching the entire exchange typing quickly on her computer terminal, looked up. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes held a firm, unyielding authority. She did not reach for the security telephone. Instead, she looked directly at my father. Mr. Montgomery. I apologize for the interruption, she said, her polite customer service tone cutting through the chaotic shouting of my family. However, we have a much more pressing issue regarding your travel itinerary. The credit card on file for your premium lounge access and your international first-class flight upgrades has just been flagged for severe fraud. It has been declined by the issuing bank. The entire family froze. The sudden shift in the conversation derailed their aggressive momentum completely. My father's face drained of all remaining color. He stared at the concierge as if she had just spoken to him in a foreign language. Declined, he repeated the word, slipping from his lips like a heavy stone. That is impossible. Run it again. There are millions of dollars in that account. I already attempted to process the transaction 3 times, sir. The concierge replied, tapping her keyboard to verify the system logs. The offshore banking institution has placed a hard lock on the account. The error code indicates a federal freeze. I cannot process this card or any other card linked to that specific financial profile. Patricia let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. This is ridiculous, she said, waving her hand in the air. It is obviously a simple bank error. Richard probably triggered a security alert by booking so many expensive first-class tickets at once. Just use another card, Richard. Do not let this incompetent desk clerk ruin our morning. My father did not move. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. He finally understood what I meant when I said his flight was canceled. He realized I had found the hidden directory on his computer. Jamal rolled his eyes and let out a loud, arrogant sigh. He reached into the inside pocket of his custom-tailored blazer and pulled out a heavy, solid metal platinum credit card. He tossed it onto the marble counter with a loud metallic clank. Do not worry about it, Richard, Jamal boasted, flashing a smug smile at the concierge. I will cover the upgrades. Use my platinum card. Swipe it and let us get back to the champagne. I have a meeting in Honolulu and no time to deal with glitches. The concierge picked up the metal card, running it through the reader. The machine processed for 2 seconds before emitting a sharp beep. A red error message illuminated her monitor. She looked at Jamal, handing the card back. I am sorry, sir, she said. This card is declined. The system shows an asset freeze. Patricia shoved her card forward. Run mine, she demanded. The concierge swiped it. Declined, madam, she stated. I stepped forward seamlessly, filling the dead space created by their collective shock. I reached into my tailored blazer pocket and pulled out my own sleek corporate credit card. I slid it across the cool marble counter toward the concierge. I will take a bottle of sparkling water, please, I said, my voice ringing with absolute crystal clarity. The concierge took my card with a relieved nod, glad to process a transaction that actually worked. She swiped the plastic through the reader. The machine emitted a pleasant chiming sound, instantly approving the purchase. She handed me the chilled glass bottle and my receipt. Thank you, I replied, taking a slow, deliberate sip. I turned around to face my family. Their expressions were a chaotic mixture of panic and total bewilderment. They could not comprehend how the poor, struggling daughter possessed the only functioning credit card in the entire group. The realization was slowly crawling across my father's face. But Jamal was still entirely trapped in his own arrogant delusions. He stared at the metal platinum card sitting uselessly on the counter and then glared at me as if I had somehow cast a spell on the banking terminal. This is a temporary system glitch. Jamal scoffed, his deep voice carrying a nervous edge. He frantically patted his tailored pockets, looking for his phone. My accounting team will have this sorted out in 5 minutes. I am the founder of a massive technology firm. I do not have time for amateur clerical errors. I took another slow sip of water, savoring the crisp taste. The elite travelers in the surrounding reception area had paused their conversations. Business executives and wealthy tourists were openly watching the unfolding drama, drawn by the spectacle of a platinum card being rejected in a first-class lounge. I decided it was time to give them a real show. I closed the distance between Jamal and myself, stopping just inches from his chest. I looked up into his eyes, projecting the full weight of my professional authority. "You do not have an accounting team, Jamal," I stated, my voice loud and commanding enough to echo off the frosted glass doors. "You do not have a technology firm. You have a fraudulent shell company built on lies and stolen money." Jamal let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. He quickly tried to look around at the audience to share the joke, but nobody was smiling. "Are you having a mental breakdown, Natalie?" he mocked, trying to maintain his alpha male posture. "You have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. Go back to your cheap apartment before you embarrass yourself further." I did not raise my voice, but I hardened my tone, turning it into a sharp weapon. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I replied, unyielding. "I have spent the last 48 hours conducting a comprehensive forensic audit of your entire digital footprint. I intercepted your unencrypted data traffic on my parents' network last night. I pulled your bank routing numbers, your corporate tax filings, and your desperate emails to private lenders. I know exactly what you are hiding behind that expensive suit." The confident smirk on Jamal's face twitched. His dark eyes darted left and right, suddenly aware of the crowd of wealthy travelers watching our every move. He opened his mouth to issue another insult, but the words died in his throat. I took a step closer, backing him up against the marble reception desk. "Your company has zero revenue." "Jamal," I announced, enunciating every single syllable so the entire lounge could hear clearly. "You have never sold a single product. You have never secured a single legitimate client. Your highly publicized startup is a total fabrication. You are $2 million in debt to illegal predatory lenders. The only reason you aren't in prison is because my parents have been wiring you, my stolen inheritance." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of bystanders. Several executives lowered their morning newspapers, staring at the man who had just been brutally exposed as a massive financial fraudster. Brittany let out a high-pitched shriek, grabbing Jamal's arm. "Jamal, tell her to shut up. Tell everyone she is lying. He is a millionaire. He is a visionary." Tell them Jamal did not speak. He could not speak. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking physically ill. His broad shoulders slumped forward as the invisible weight of his $2 million debt crashed down upon him in front of an audience of his supposed peers. I stepped into his line of sight, refusing to let him look away. My father forged a power of attorney document to hijack my grandfather's offshore trust fund. I continued delivering the final, devastating blow. He liquidated my assets to pay your minimum monthly balances, to keep the loan sharks from breaking your legs. And this entire Hawaii trip is nothing but a pathetic smokescreen. You and Richard were flying to Honolulu to meet a hard money financier to place a lien on my commercial real estate in Texas. You were going to steal my last remaining asset to save yourself. From federal prison, Jamal's confident facade shattered instantly. The illusion of the wealthy, successful tech founder evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, desperate man drowning in debt. He began to sweat profusely, thick beads of moisture forming on his forehead and tracking down the sides of his perfectly trimmed beard. He pulled his arm away from Brittany's grasp, backing away from me as if I were a literal blazing fire. He bumped into a brass stanchion, nearly knocking it over. The elite passengers stared at him with unvarnished disgust, actively whispering to each other and openly pointing at the deeply humiliated, exposed fraudster. He opened his mouth, but he could not defend himself because every word I spoke was the absolute, undeniable truth. He was completely trapped inside the cold, dark, inescapable reality of his own catastrophic creation, and the absolute terror in his eyes confirmed my victory. For a fraction of a second, the entire reception area was completely silent. The only sound was the soft hum of the airport ventilation system and the distant murmur of boarding announcements. Then the fragile glass house of my sister's ego violently shattered. Brittany let out a piercing, ear-splitting scream that forced a nearby flight attendant to flinch. Her face twisted into a mask of pure feral rage. She could not process the information I had just delivered. Her brain simply refused to accept that her perfect, luxurious reality was a total illusion, funded by the sibling she despised. She stomped forward, her white silk tracksuit rustling loudly as she inserted herself between me and her trembling husband. "You are a liar!" Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You are a disgusting, jealous liar, Natalie. You have always been insanely jealous of me and Jamal. You have always hated that I am the beautiful, successful daughter who married a millionaire while you sit alone in a tiny, ugly apartment. You made up this entire psychotic story just to ruin our family vacation because you are bitter and pathetic." I did not break eye contact with her. I stood perfectly still, letting her exhaust herself with her desperate, frantic insults. The wealthy spectators in the lounge were whispering and shaking their heads, appalled by her lack of decorum. My mother. Patricia covered her face with her hands, too humiliated to intervene, while my father Richard stared at the floor in defeated silence. "He is a visionary." Brittany continued, her chest heaving as she pointed a shaking finger at my face. "Jamal built his company from the ground up. He is brilliant and successful, and he provides me with an incredible life. My husband is twice the person you will ever be. You are just a sad, lonely auditor who wishes she had my life. Now get out of my face and go back to scrubbing my baseboards." Her desperate defense of a man who was secretly drowning in predatory debt was almost pathetic to witness. I offered her a cold, pitying smile. That smile was the absolute breaking point for the golden child. She completely lost what little control she had left. With a guttural sound of fury, Brittany raised her hand high into the air. She lunged forward, bringing her open palm down with all her strength, intending to slap the smug expression right off my face. She never made contact. I reacted with the lightning-fast reflexes of someone who had spent their entire life dodging emotional and psychological attacks from this family. My hand shot upward, cutting through the air like a whip. I caught her wrist firmly in midair, stopping her strike dead in its tracks. The loud smack of my palm connecting with her forearm echoed sharply through the quiet VIP lounge. Brittany gasped in shock. She tried to yank her arm away, but I tightened my grip, my fingers locking around her delicate wrist like a steel vise. I pulled her slightly forward, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. The arrogant, entitled golden child was suddenly face to face with the hardened corporate executive she had underestimated her entire life. I held her there, trapped in my grip, and delivered the brutal, unvarnished truth. "I want you to listen to me very carefully, Brittany," I stated, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous octave that commanded absolute attention. "I want you to look at the heavy gold Rolex currently sitting on your husband's wrist. I bought that watch. I want you to think about the massive mortgage on your pristine waterfront house. I pay that mortgage every single month. I want you to picture the luxury vehicles parked in your driveway and the designer clothes hanging in your closet. My money bought every single one of those things." Her eyes widened in terror as she struggled uselessly against my grip. "You are not a successful power couple, Brittany." I continued, enunciating every single word so they would burn permanently into her memory. "You have absolutely no money of your own. Your husband is a complete financial failure who relies on my stolen inheritance to buy your affection. You are nothing but a pair of broke parasites, living on welfare provided by your failure of a sister. Your entire identity is a fraud. You are essentially a beggar dressed in stolen silk." I held her gaze for 3 more agonizing seconds, ensuring the absolute reality of her situation completely settled into her brain. Then I released her wrist with a sharp, dismissive shove. Brittany stumbled backward, her designer heels slipping slightly on the polished marble floor. She caught her balance and immediately spun around to face Jamal. Her breathing was shallow and erratic. "Jamal," she pleaded, her voice shaking with raw panic. "Tell her she is crazy. Tell her she is making all of this up. Tell everyone here that you are a millionaire and your company is successful. Jamal, Please tell her she is a liar. She reached out and grabbed his tailored jacket, shaking him slightly. But Jamal did not look at her. He did not puff out his chest or issue a booming, arrogant denial. He simply stared down at the marble floor, his shoulders completely slumped in total defeat. He was profusely sweating, the evidence of his profound guilt shining brightly under the lounge lights. He could not look his wife in the eye, because he knew I had completely exposed his catastrophic financial ruin. Jamal, Brittany begged again, her voice breaking into a high-pitched whine. Please say something. Please tell me my house is safe. He gently pulled his arm out of her grasp and took a step away from her, still refusing to speak. The absolute silence from her supposedly wealthy husband was the most deafening sound in the entire airport. Her entire reality violently shattered forever. Brittany's knees buckled beneath her white silk tracksuit. She collapsed into a nearby leather lounge chair, hyperventilating, as the devastating truth finally crushed her completely. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing loudly, while the wealthy spectators watched the spectacle with unblinking fascination. My father, Richard, could no longer stand by and watch his golden family be publicly dismantled. He marched forward, his face a dangerous shade of crimson. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest, trying to summon the terrifying patriarchal authority he had wielded over me since childhood. You have gone completely insane, Natalie. Richard bellowed, his voice vibrating with desperate fury. I do not know what kind of deranged hacker tricks you used to block our credit cards or what garbage you are spewing about Jamal. But this ends right now. I am calling airport security. I am having you arrested for criminal harassment and escorted out of this terminal in handcuffs. You are a jealous, bitter woman trying to ruin our anniversary, and I will see you locked in a holding cell for this stunt. He reached into his tailored suit pocket and pulled out his phone, glaring at me as if expecting me to cower and beg for forgiveness. Instead, I threw my head back and laughed. It was a cold, echoing sound that sliced through the thick tension in the reception area. The sound of my laughter genuinely unsettled him, causing his hand to falter over his keypad. Call them, Richard, I said, my voice ringing with absolute unwavering confidence. Call airport security right now. In fact, tell them to contact federal law enforcement while they are at it. The FBI will want to speak with you anyway. My father froze, his phone hovering near his ear. My mother, Patricia, gasped, clutching her designer handbag against her chest like a protective shield. What are you talking about? She stammered, her eyes darting nervously between me and the lounge concierge, who was still silently observing from behind the marble desk. I unlatched the heavy brass clasps of my leather briefcase. I reached inside and pulled out the thick stack of federal court documents Victor had meticulously prepared. The pristine white paper felt heavy with impending justice. I slammed the massive file down onto the polished marble counter. The loud smack echoed sharply across the room, making Jamal physically flinch. I know everything, Richard, I announced, my voice dropping into a deadly serious corporate register. I know this entire Hawaii vacation is a massive, elaborate smokescreen. You are not flying to Maui to celebrate 40 years of marriage. You are flying to Honolulu to meet with a shadow financier who specializes in hard money loans and distressed commercial assets. You scheduled an in-person meeting for tomorrow morning to finalize a catastrophic financial maneuver. My father's face went completely ashen. The angry crimson color drained away, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. He stared at the stack of papers on the counter, but he was too terrified to reach out and touch them. You are $2 million in debt because Jamal runs a fake technology company. I continued, exposing the darkest corners of their criminal conspiracy. His creditors are threatening to file federal wire fraud charges and put him in prison. So, you decided to play the ultimate hero. You agreed to act as the primary guarantor for a new massive loan to bail out your golden son-in-law. But you did not plan to use your own money because your real estate business does not have that kind of liquid capital. I took a step closer, invading his personal space. I looked directly into his terrified eyes. Instead, you offered up the very last untouched asset in my grandfather's offshore trust fund. You offered up my pristine commercial real estate located in downtown Austin, Texas. You were going to let a syndicate of predatory lenders place a $2 million lien on land that belongs entirely to me. You were going to sign those legal papers tomorrow morning, take the cash to save Jamal, and leave me chained to an insurmountable debt for the rest of my natural life. Patricia let out a strangled whimper, swaying on her feet. Richard opened his mouth, attempting to formulate a coherent denial, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He was staring at the exact digital copies of the highly encrypted emails he thought were perfectly secure. I pulled a specific page from the center of the stack and held it up for him to see. "And this, Richard, is the absolute final nail in your coffin," I said, tapping the scanned image of the legal charter. "This is the power of attorney document you submitted to the offshore banking institution 15 years ago. The document that granted you total unrestricted administrative access to my inheritance. It is an incredibly confident forgery. You perfectly replicated my 18-year-old signature to steal millions of dollars from your own daughter. You used my legacy to fund Jamal's fake empire and buy Brittany her waterfront mansion." The surrounding audience of elite business travelers murmured in collective shock. They were witnessing the brutal execution of a massive financial criminal right in the middle of a luxury airport lounge. Jamal backed away slowly, his eyes wide with terror, as he realized the full scope of the federal investigation heading their way. "You thought you were so incredibly smart, Richard," I said, keeping my tone ruthlessly calm. "You thought because I worked a quiet corporate job and lived in a modest apartment that I was stupid. You underestimated the fact that I hunt corporate financial fraud for a living." I picked up the final document in the stack. I dropped the federal injunction on the marble reception counter. "Your assets are frozen, Richard," I declared. "You do not have a single dime to your name. You are not going to Hawaii today. You are going to federal court right now." The heavy silence that followed my declaration was absolute. The suffocating arrogance that defined my family evaporated into the sterile airport air. My father stared at the federal injunction resting on the marble counter. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. The powerful real estate patriarch who controlled every narrative was paralyzed by a single piece of paper. He could not yell. He could not threaten. He could not buy his way out of an indictment. My mother, Patricia, finally broke the silence. The reality of her frozen bank accounts and impending social destruction crashed down on her at once. The pristine country club facade she meticulously maintained for 40 years shattered. She let out a guttural, desperate wail that echoed through the exclusive lounge. Patricia dropped to the polished marble floor, completely abandoning her beloved social decorum. She crawled forward on her hands and knees, staining her designer dress against the stone. She reached out with trembling fingers and grabbed the fabric of my tailored pant leg. "We are family, Natalie." Patricia sobbed hysterically, her perfectly applied makeup running down her face in dark streaks. "We did what we had to do to protect your sister. You cannot do this to us. Please do not take everything away. We were just trying to save her marriage. You have to drop these charges. I am your mother. You cannot send your father to prison." I looked down at the woman who had spent 33 years making me feel like an unwanted burden. She was weeping at my feet, begging for mercy, while admitting she sacrificed my future just to shield her golden child from embarrassment. She did not express a single ounce of remorse for stealing my grandfather's legacy. She was only crying because she had finally been caught and the consequences were catastrophic. Before I could even address her pathetic display, the toxic alliance between my father and my brother-in-law completely imploded. The imminent threat of federal prison stripped away their mutual superficial respect. Jamal spun around and aggressively shoved my father in the chest. "You told me the offshore accounts were completely untraceable," Jamal screamed, his voice cracking with pure panic. "You told me the power of attorney was ironclad. You said she was just a clueless desk worker who would never figure it out. You promised me the $2 million would clear before anyone noticed the Texas property was leveraged. You messed up the paperwork, Richard. You left a digital trail leading straight to my corporate accounts." My father stumbled backward, recovering his balance, and immediately fired back with equal ferocity. Do not you dare blame me for this, you absolute fraud! Richard roared, his face twisting with unfiltered rage. I committed federal crimes to save you from loan sharks. You are a useless leech, Jamal. You spent 3 years parading around my country club pretending to be a technology visionary while bleeding my daughter's trust fund dry. You ruined my family with your massive debt and your fake company. You are a pathetic con artist. You handed me the stolen money, Jamal shouted back, stepping closer and jabbing a finger at my father's face. You happily funded my lifestyle to keep Brittany happy. You loved showing me off to your rich friends. You were fine with destroying Natalie's life as long as it kept your golden family looking perfect. You forged the signature, Richard. You are the one facing decades in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud. I am just a failed businessman, but you are a documented thief. The two men continued to scream at each other, hurling vicious insults right in front of the horrified lounge staff and wealthy spectators. Every terrible secret they had buried was broadcast for the entire world to hear. The polished facade of the Montgomery family was completely decimated forever. They were tearing each other apart like cornered animals, trying to shift the blame. The airport security guards hovering near the entrance simply watched the spectacular implosion of a supposedly wealthy family. Over in the seating area, Brittany was still slumped in the leather chair. She was rocking back and forth, clutching her designer handbag to her chest and staring blankly at the floor. The reality that her entire luxurious existence was a lie had broken her fragile mind. She watched her husband and her father viciously attack each other, but she made no move to intervene. Her golden child delusions had been funded by my stolen inheritance, and now the bank was permanently closed. She had no skills, no career, and no future without my money. Patricia tightened her grip on my pant leg, tugging at the fabric in a desperate bid for my attention. Please, Natalie, she begged, her voice hoarse and raw. I will do anything. We will sell the estate. We will pay you back every single penny. Just call your lawyer and stop the injunction. Do not let them take our home. Do not let them put Richard in handcuffs. Think about your nieces and nephews. Think about what this scandal will do to the family name. I stared down at my mother, observing her frantic pleading with total emotional detachment. I felt absolutely nothing for the weeping woman at my feet. There was no pity, no anger, and certainly no desire to earn her validation. The 15 years of intense psychological conditioning she inflicted upon me had been neutralized. I spent my entire life yearning for her approval, trying to prove my worth to a family that viewed me only as an expendable resource. They drained my finances, mocked my career, and attempted to chain me to an illegal debt. I calmly pulled my leg away from my mother's desperate grasp. I took a slow, deliberate step backward, creating a physical boundary between myself and her completely unhinged sobbing. I smoothed the fabric of my tailored trousers, standing tall and resolute. I remained entirely unmoved by her dramatic, pathetic display. I stood looking down at my mother as she wept on the marble floor. Her manicured hands remained empty, reaching for a daughter she had thrown away decades ago. The intense shouting match between my father and Jamal began to lose its aggressive momentum. Both men were slowly running out of breath and realizing that screaming at each other would not reverse the federal injunction. The heavy reality of their situation was settling over them like a thick, suffocating blanket. They were utterly broke and completely exposed. In the midst of this complete social destruction, my sister Brittany finally seemed to snap out of her catatonic state. She slowly lifted her head from her hands. Her eyes were red and swollen, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. She looked around the VIP lounge, staring at the wealthy travelers who were still watching our family collapse in real time. Her gaze shifted from her disgraced husband to her weeping mother and finally landed on me. The realization of her immediate reality hit her with a sudden violent force. She stood up from the leather lounge chair, her legs shaking so badly she had to grip the armrest to keep herself upright. Her voice emerged as a fragile, trembling whisper. Natalie, she pleaded, stepping tentatively toward me. Natalie, please stop this. I do not care about the money right now. I do not care about the house or the cars or the vacation. Where are my children? You said they were safe. Please just tell me where my babies are. I looked at my sister, noting the genuine panic in her eyes. For the first time in her entire privileged life, Brittany was experiencing true helplessness. She was no longer the arrogant golden child demanding that I scrub her baseboards. She was just a terrified mother who suddenly realized she had absolutely no control over her own life. Jamal heard her pleading and turned his attention back to me. His anger had evaporated, replaced entirely by fear. He took a hesitant step forward, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Natalie, please," he begged, his deep voice cracking under the intense strain. "I know we treated you terribly. I know I was completely out of line this morning. But you cannot punish innocent children for our mistakes. Tell us where they are. We just want to get our kids and go home." I maintained my cold, professional composure, refusing to let their sudden displays of parental concern manipulate my emotions. "You do not have a home to return to, Jamal," I reminded him, my voice carrying a sharp, absolute finality. "Your waterfront mansion was seized under the federal wire fraud statutes the moment the judge signed that injunction. The federal authorities have already secured the premises. You cannot go back there. Your bank accounts are completely frozen. Your shell company is under active federal investigation. You are standing in this airport with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your backs and a stack of completely useless credit cards." My mother let out another loud wailing sob, pressing her face against the cold floor. My father stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He looked like a man who had just been handed a terminal diagnosis. Brittany began to hyperventilate again, clutching her chest, as the full weight of my words crushed her remaining hopes. "But my babies," she gasped, struggling to pull air into her lungs. "You have to give them back to me. You cannot just take them away. You cannot leave us here like this." I reached into my tailored blazer pocket and pulled out a small, crisp, white envelope. I held it up, letting the harsh overhead lounge lights catch the embossed logo of an elite hospitality brand. "I am not taking anyone away from you, Brittany." I stated my tone perfectly, even and devoid of any sympathy. "I am simply ensuring that your innocent children are completely shielded from the catastrophic consequences of your criminal actions. They did not ask to be born into a family built on stolen wealth and predatory debt. They do not deserve to witness their father being arrested or their grandfather facing decades in federal prison." I took a slow, deliberate step toward my sister and extended my hand, holding out the white envelope. Brittany snatched it from my fingers with trembling hands. She tore open the seal and pulled out a heavy cardstock reservation confirmation. "Your kids are perfectly safe," I announced, projecting my voice so every single person in the reception area could hear my final decree. "They are currently enjoying a massive luxury family suite at the downtown Ritz-Carlton. They are swimming in a private indoor water park, completely distracted and blissfully happy. They are under the constant supervision of two highly trained, fully bonded professional nannies." I paused, letting the silence stretch for a moment. "And just to be absolutely clear, I paid for their premium suite and their elite childcare using my own legitimate hard-earned money. Every single dollar came from my corporate auditing salary. None of it was stolen from a hidden offshore trust fund." I looked at the broken people scattered across the marble floor. I looked at my father, who forged my signature to steal my future. I looked at my mother, who treated me like a servant to protect her false image. I looked at Jamal, who paraded around like a billionaire while bleeding my legacy dry. And I looked at my sister, who spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate herself. "You can go pick up your children anytime you want. But you will have to figure out how to pay for an Uber to get there. I hear they do not take declined cards." Without another word, I turned my back on my screaming, ruined family and walked out of the airport, the sound of my heels echoing through the terminal. The days following the airport confrontation moved with the relentless speed of a massive freight train. I watched from a safe distance as their lives unraveled. The federal injunction executed by Victor Grant acted as a brutal catalyst, dismantling my family's entire fake empire overnight. The local news cycle quickly picked up the story of the disgraced real estate patriarch. Helicopters circled their massive estate as federal agents carried out boxes of physical hard drives and paper ledgers. The unsealed court documents revealed the sheer depth of their offshore tax evasion and wire fraud to the public. My parents went from being the absolute elite of the Atlanta country club scene to becoming the ultimate cautionary tale in less than a single week. The wealthy socialites who used to drink their expensive champagne immediately cut all ties, deleting photos and issuing polite statements of absolute shock to the media. The grand illusion they spent 4 decades building evaporated into thin air, leaving them completely isolated and universally despised. Richard was formally indicted on multiple felony charges, including aggravated identity theft, massive wire fraud, and forging a federal power of attorney document. Because he had specifically targeted a protected trust fund across international lines, the federal prosecutors showed absolutely zero mercy during the arraignment. The presiding judge denied his request for bail, citing him as a severe flight risk due to his deep offshore connections and his demonstrated willingness to flee the jurisdiction. My father traded his custom-tailored suits for a standard-issue orange prison uniform. The consequences of their greed were swift and absolute. He is currently facing up to 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Patricia was not charged with the direct act of forgery, but she was legally listed as an unindicted co-conspirator. She lost the sprawling brick mansion, the luxury cars, and her entire social identity. The federal authorities seized everything acquired with my stolen money, leaving her relying on overwhelmed public defenders and charity from distant relatives who barely tolerated her presence. She went from dripping in diamonds to standing in line at the local courthouse carrying a cheap plastic folder, completely stripped of her former unearned glory. Jamal's fraudulent technology startup violently collapsed the very same day his banking accounts were frozen. The predatory private lenders realized their $2 million land lien was permanently blocked by the federal courts. They immediately descended upon him, seizing his corporate assets and forcing him into catastrophic bankruptcy. The angry creditors legally took his heavy gold Rolex, his expensive luxury vehicles, and completely gutted his professional reputation. Without the constant flow of my stolen inheritance, Jamal was exposed as nothing more than a desperate con artist with zero actual business skills. The stress of total financial ruin completely shattered his toxic marriage to my sister. Brittany had to face a harsh reality she never once prepared for. The golden child who previously demanded I scrub her baseboards was abruptly forced to sell her massive collection of designer handbags and silk dresses just to afford the first month of rent on a tiny, cramped studio apartment. She had no college degree, no job experience, and no wealthy parents to bail her out of her miserable situation. She was finally forced to get a minimum wage job working the cash register at a local diner just to feed her children. Every day she had to endure the agonizing humiliation of serving food to strangers. As for my grandfather's legacy, the federal courts moved with surprising efficiency and swiftness to protect me. Because I possessed the original digital logs intercepting the fraud before the final wire transfer executed, the Texas commercial real estate remained completely untouched and safely in my name. The remaining liquid capital in the offshore accounts was formally restored to my absolute control. Throughout the entire legal process, I maintained strict and unbreakable boundaries. My phone frequently filled with desperate voicemails from Patricia begging for financial mercy and unhinged messages from Brittany demanding I drop the civil suits. I deleted every single message without listening to them. When Richard's criminal trial officially began, the defense attorneys repeatedly requested my presence, hoping I would offer a statement of familial leniency to reduce his heavy sentencing. I completely refused to ever attend the criminal trial. I refused to write a victim impact statement. I simply let the undeniable digital evidence speak for itself and allowed the federal justice system to permanently process their crimes. They were strangers to me now, completely and permanently erased from my peaceful daily existence. 6 months later, I finally took the tropical vacation my parents had so desperately tried to steal. I did not fly to Hawaii using a hijacked offshore trust fund or forged financial documents. I purchased my international first-class ticket using the legitimate money I earned from my highly successful career as a senior cybersecurity auditor. I stepped off the plane in Maui and breathed in the warm ocean air, feeling a profound sense of absolute freedom. I am currently sitting on the private balcony of an exclusive luxury suite at a five-star resort. The morning sun reflects brilliantly off the crystal-clear water of the Pacific Ocean. A gentle tropical breeze rustles the palm trees below my terrace. I take a slow sip of my perfectly brewed black coffee and listen to the rhythmic crashing of the ocean waves against the white sandy beach. I look out at the endless pristine horizon, feeling a deep, untouchable peace radiating through my entire body. I survived their intense psychological abuse and dismantled their criminal conspiracy without ever losing my professional composure. I protected my grandfather's legacy and secured my own financial independence. The most brutal revenge against toxic people is not screaming or holding on to bitter anger. The ultimate revenge is achieving absolute untouchable success and permanently cutting the dead weight from your life forever. I smile warmly, knowing my true happiness has just begun today. The story of Natalie and her family serves as a powerful testament to one of the most difficult but necessary lessons in life. Blood relation does not automatically entitle anyone to your peace, your resources, or your future. For years, Natalie was conditioned to believe she was the flawed outsider in her own family, a scapegoat forced to endure relentless humiliation simply because she did not fit her parents' superficial mold. She accepted the emotional abuse, assuming it was her duty to bear the weight of her family's impossible expectations. However, her journey reveals that true empowerment begins the exact moment you stop seeking validation from those committed to misunderstanding you. The profound lesson here is the absolute necessity of establishing unbreakable boundaries. When toxic individuals use familial obligation as a weapon to exploit and demean, walking away is never an act of selfishness. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Natalie's decision to meticulously dismantle her family's fraudulent empire without screaming, crying, or losing her professional composure demonstrates that the best response to profound betrayal is cold, calculated independence. She teaches us that our self-worth is not defined by how poorly broken people treat us, but by our ability to recognize our own value and protect it at all costs. Ultimately, the story redefines the concept of closure. True closure does not require a tearful apology or a sudden change of heart from abusers who are incapable of genuine remorse. Instead, it is found in the quiet, unshakable confidence of building a spectacular life entirely on your own terms. True justice is achieved when you step out of the shadows of manipulation and step into the bright light of your own success. If you are ready to stop letting toxic people dictate your worth, take the first step today by drawing a line they can never cross again.